The content you are about to watch is not intended for children. Viewer discretion advised. Welcome back, Regretters. It's time for another episode of Regretful Reads. Today, we are revisiting what's become a classic on the Regretful Reads channel. Written by Sanders Edge, it is the life and times of Squidbob. Today, we are looking at Part 7. This story is entitled, Can a Sponge and an Octopus Mix Business and Pleasure? By Sanders Edge. Make sure to watch the rest of the videos in the playlist if you want to keep up with the story. Otherwise, let's get started. The summary here says, Spongebob and Squidward get a wonderful opportunity and presents them with a whole new slew of adventures. Along the way, they meet some new faces, one of whom they both grow quite fond of. Ooh! Okay. Chapter 1. Opportunity Knocks. It was now a month after SpongeBob's miscarriage. Things were slowly returning to normal, and both partners had agreed to stay in therapy to help them cope. While they both still had days where depression would overtake them, for the most part, they were starting to move past the tragedy. To also help with everything, SpongeBob had decided to go back to work at the Krusty Krab full-time. While the extra money was nice, he'd forgotten just how demanding it could be doing 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. It only took a couple of weeks before he started to regret his decision. He wanted to focus on Claire, but at the same time, he wanted to distract himself while she was off at preschool. SpongeBob wrestled back and forth on what to do. He was pretty sure he was going to tell Mr. Krabs that he needed to go back to being part-time. But before he could talk to him about it, the crab called SpongeBob into his office.
Have a seat, boyo.
Mr. Krabs had a worried look on his face.
I need to talk to you. Don't worry, you're not in trouble.
SpongeBob walked slowly over to the desk and pulled out the chair. He wasn't quite sure what his boss needed to talk to him about, but he really did feel like he was going to be in trouble.
What's up, Mr. Krabs?
SpongeBob tried to remain upbeat.
It's me daughter,
Mr. Krabs said.
Oh my goodness!
SpongeBob had a mix of relief and worry.
Is she okay?
Yes, she's fine.
Mr. Krabs waved his claw.
It's just she's found her mother.
Isn't that a good thing?
SpongeBob was confused.
It is, Mr. Krabs replied. See, when she was just a little lass, me and her mom split up. She got a job in New Kelp City, and I didn't want to leave the crab here, so she filed for divorce the next day, then left. We didn't know what had happened to her, and little Pearl became my everything. Now, for some reason, she wanted to reconnect with her daughter after all these years.
Mr. Krabs.
SpongeBob felt sorry for his boss.
I had no idea.
Most people don't.
Mr. Krabs dabbed at his eye.
It was hard on me, and I still love her after all these years.
Mr. Krabs reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a dusty photo and handed it over to SpongeBob. There, looking back at the sponge, was a younger Mr. Krabs holding a baby Pearl and standing next to him, a female whale.
So this is your wife?
SpongeBob asked, handing the photo back.
Aye, Mr. Krabs responded. Sheila's her name, and I haven't spoken to her since she packed her things and left.
SpongeBob nodded, not knowing what to say.
But back to why I called ye in here. Mr. Krabs coughed and composed himself. Me daughter wants to go to New Kelp City, and I want to go with her. I blew it with Sheila once before, and I'm not going to do it again. I know she isn't married. Pearl found out that at my request. So I feel like I need to try to fix it.
So what does that mean for the Krusty Krab?
SpongeBob felt like his world was about to crash down around him.
Here's the thing.
Mr. Krabs fiddled with his claws.
I'm not going to shut her down, but I'm not going to run it anymore.
Then who is?
SpongeBob furrowed his brow.
You are! Arg, 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 arg.
Mr. Krabs chuckled.
Well, you and Squidward are. That is if you agree. If not, I'll be selling her off and going with me daughter.
Spongebob was lost for words.
I already asked Squidward.
Mr. Krabs sensed the conflict in the sponge.
He said it's up to you, but I'll go get him in here so you two can have a chat.
Mr. Krabs yelled for Squidward, who was waiting outside the door.
So what do you think, my love?
Squidward asked, walking over to his partner.
Gee,
Spongebob scratched his head.
what do you think?
It's a great opportunity for us,
Squidward smiled.
but I know you want to focus on our family, and this might take some serious effort.
How much will this cost?
Spongebob turned to Mr. Krabs.
Nothing!
Mr. Krabs gave the sponge a smile.
Well, almost nothing. See, I'd be an investor in the crabs and get 25% of the profits. The remaining 75 would be for the two of you. You'd also not be able to sell it, sell off the formula, or anything like that. It'd give you any idea, I'd make about $500,000 in year's profits, so you'd be bringing in about $375,000.
That was both way more than either Squidward or Spongebob made in a year. In fact, it was nearly 5 times as much as they made combined. It was a staggering amount of money for the two of them, and really, the hours wouldn't be that much different. Sure, there'd be more stress, but it was a well-established business that they just need to keep going. They could also split their time there, meaning they'd both have more time at home.
So?
Squidward nudged his partner.
We'll do it, Mr. Krabs!
Spongebob shouted.
Fantastic!
Mr. Krabs leapt out of his chair and shook Squidward's tentacle and gave Spongebob a hug.
I knew ye wouldn't let me down. Now let's celebrate.
Chapter 2. The Dashing Young Octopus. The days leading up to Mr. Krabs' departure was a flurry of activity. Since SpongeBob and Squidward were going to take over the management duties, they needed to hire some new employees to fill in their old positions. Sure, they'd take their place at the cash register or griddle if need be, but neither of them were all that keen on doing it all day in, day out. Mr. Krabs offered to sit in on the interviews, since neither SpongeBob or Squidward had really ever done them before. Plus, Mr. Krabs knew that deep down, SpongeBob would love everyone and want to give them a shot, while Squidward would just hate anyone who came their way. The first couple of candidates were pretty lackluster, either not really wanting the job or being mostly uninterested in food service. However, a dashing young octopus was up next, and when it walked in, both SpongeBob and Squidward couldn't help but be a little intrigued by the cephalopod's looks. "Good day, gentlemen," the octopus said and ran a tentacle through his jet-black hair. "My name is NATO, NATO del Tentáculos."
Nice to meet you, Squid NATO,
Squidward said, trying not to sound all dreamy when he heard the octopus's accent. "So tell me about yourself." "Back at home, I was a simple street food vendor," Squid NATO said. "But there is nothing left for me back there, so I sold my business to start a new life here in Bikini Bottom. I can grill, saute, barbecue, fry, bake, and whatever else you need me to do in the kitchen."
What kind of food did you sell?
SpongeBob asked. "Oh, my own creation." Squid NATO flashed a smile. "I called them El Diablo Kelpo, which was a kelpie fry mixed with herbs and spices served on a corn tortilla and covered in one of my special sauces."
Well, that sounds good,
Squidward said, still all dreamy.
What kind of sauce did you have?
"That would be a secret," Squid NATO chuckled. "I protected the formula from those sauces with my life. The secret to a successful business is to not give up what makes you better than the competition."
"Well, boyo," Mr. Krabs piped in, "I think he'd be a fit just right fine here. It'd be up to me, the new owners, whether or not you're hired."
He's hired!
Both SpongeBob and Squidward said in unison. "Gracias," Squid NATO said and shook each of the owners' hands, or tentacles, or claws. After hammering out all the details with Squid NATO, the 3 owners had a few more candidates to get through. The next 2 were pretty awful, which left them with just one more potential employee to fill in for the cashier position.
Hello?
A shy fish poked her head inside the door.
Is this for the interview?
Yes, Mr. Krabs replied. Come in, lass.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Krabs.
The fish said.
I didn't want to interrupt anything. My name is Cindy Fintooth. Nice to meet you, Mrs. Fintooth.
Spongebob smiled.
So tell me about yourself. Well, I'm new to Bikini Bottom,
Cindy began.
I came here from New Kelp City to be closer to my mom. I'm trying to help her get back on her feet, so I need a job that allows me to work all the hours I can earn the money. I've heard Mr. Krabs here is a genius when it comes to making money, so I figured this would be a good place.
Mr. Krabs blushed a deeper shade of red. He loved it when anyone talked about his knack for making money, especially when that someone was a beautiful girl. Cindy! May I call you Cindy? Mr. Krabs said. Well, I appreciate the compliment. The new owners are actually Spongebob and Squidward here, but rest assured they share the same neck as I do for running a successful business.
Oh, that's just fine.
Cindy flashed a smile.
I'm sure if they're trained under you, then they're more than qualified.
Well, you have my vote.
Mr. Krabs laughed.
Boys?
SpongeBob and Squidward both agreed. Their team was now complete. Or at least, nearly complete. They still wanted to add a few more employees, but for the time being, they were set and could at least manage to keep the restaurant going while they got up to speed on the whole manager thing. Chapter 3. Living Their Best Life.
So what do you think of Squid NATO?
SpongeBob broke the silence on the drive home.
What?
Squidward gulped loudly and tried not to veer the boat off the road.
Oh, the new guy? Yeah, hopefully he works out.
Isn't he dreamy, though?
SpongeBob blushed slightly.
Yeah, he's okay, I guess.
Squidward lied.
Squiddy!
SpongeBob looked at his partner.
Look, I saw you swooning over him. I don't mind, really. There's nothing that says you can't look and admire a handsome specimen.
Oh, you got me.
Now it was Squidward's turn to blush.
Sorry, I didn't mean to stare at him like that.
It's okay, I promised.
SpongeBob chuckled.
Look, you're the only octopus for me, and besides, he's probably not even into guys. I give it a week before he's sleeping with Cindy.
You're probably right.
Squidward felt some relief and laughed at the thought. They pulled into the drive and walked into the pineapple, both exhausted from a long day.
Daddies!
A scream came from the living room, and Claire came running to greet her parents.
Claire Bear!
Squidward said and threw the girl into the air as she giggled.
Did you get someone to cook you food?
Claire asked.
Well, not us food, baby girl,
Squidward replied.
but yes, we did get someone to work at the restaurant making food.
Oh, good.
Claire flashed her toothy smile.
I was worried when you told me I'd have to do it. I don't know about cooking. Don't worry,
SpongeBob said.
I'll teach you everything you need to know when the time is right.
Yeah, right.
Squidward rolled his eyes in mock disgust.
I'll teach you how to cook the finer things in life, baby girl.
The three of them shared a laugh as Sandy came into the kitchen. She'd offered to babysit for SpongeBob and Squidward when Margaret wasn't around. While she really wasn't much on kids, it was nice to be able to spend time with one every now and then. Plus, she was able to start teaching her some karate moves and give her a basic intro to science.
Howdy, fellas,
Sandy said, coming into the kitchen.
Did y'all hire some folks? Yup,
Squidward said.
You might want to stop by and see Squid NATO. He's a dreamboat. No offense, Squidward,
Sandy laughed.
but octopuses just ain't my type. Well, suit yourself.
Squidward started laughing through his nose.
Get it? Suit yourself? You know, because you're in a suit? Oh, Neptune, that was bad.
Sandy rolled her eyes and shared a laugh. The three talked a little more while Claire ran around the kitchen, getting into anything and everything she wasn't supposed to. SpongeBob attempted to corral his daughter, but it was no use. She was bouncing all over and babbling about wanting to cook something. After Sandy left, SpongeBob and Squidward looked at one another. They'd wanted to order delivery, but Claire seemed so gung-ho on cooking that they didn't want to disappoint her.
What do you say, sweetie?
Squidward looked at his partner.
Should we cook something as a family?
Sounds good to me,
Spongebob replied.
Away!
Claire screamed and threw 2 pots into the air. They crashed down with a bang, causing her to jump, fall over, and then start giggling like mad.
You little doofus!
Squidward helped her up. Now, what should we cook?
Ice cream!
Claire said, not realizing that really wasn't something you cooked.
How about spaghetti?
Spongebob chimed in.
Then we can have a little ice cream for dessert. Sound good? Okay, Daddy.
Claire smiled.
So what do we need to do?
For the next hour or so, Squidward and Spongebob went through every detail on what to do. Spongebob took control of the noodles and sauce, while Squidward chopped up vegetables for the salad. Claire could hardly contain herself and bounced back and forth between the 2 partners, soaking in everything they had to teach her. As Claire was standing on a step stool next to Spongebob stirring the noodles, Squidward couldn't help but look on silently. His heart felt so full when he looked at his little family. If you would have asked him only a few short years ago if someday he'd be making pasta with his husband and daughter, he'd have said you were crazy. But here he was, and he was certain he didn't want it any other way. Spongebob had a similar moment when Claire had bounded over to Squidward to start assembling the salad. He'd always figured someday he would be married with children, but he never thought it would be Squidward of all the creatures. He still felt awful for the miscarriage that had happened, but he was joyful that at least he had Claire, his pride and joy.
Finished,
Claire said as she slopped sauce on the 3 massive plates of pasta.
Who's gonna eat all this?
Squidward looked at all the food.
We are,
Claire giggled.
You had a long day, so you need to eat up. You sound like Grandma.
Spongebob hugged his daughter.
Now let's eat!
For as long as it took them to cook everything, it seemed to take just as long to eat it. It wasn't because spaghetti was exactly hard to eat, but Claire kept wanting to tell stories about something she'd done or something she'd seen on TV. While most of the time neither Spongebob nor Squidward knew what she was on about, they were happy enough to indulge her.
All right, Claire,
Spongebob said as they'd finished eating.
Now it's time for the last part of cooking, cleaning up!
Claire groaned, but she helped clear the plates anyway and bring them into the kitchen to be washed, since she knew ice cream was just around the corner. As they put the last plate away, Claire ran over to the freezer and pulled out the carton of ice cream. Squidward really didn't want her eating something so sugary that late at night, but they had made a promise to her, and he wasn't about to break it.
Come on, Claire Bear,
Spongebob said.
You can watch 1 episode of something on TV while you eat your ice cream. Then it's bedtime. Okay, Daddy.
Claire picked up the bowl with both hands and walked into the living room. Spongebob and Squidward soon joined her as they flipped on the TV to find something to watch. After a few minutes of surfing, they eventually landed on Glovey Glove's Clubhouse, which neither of the 2 adults in the room wanted to watch. Still, it was family time though, so SpongeBob and Squidward just leaned back and held hands while Claire was engrossed in the cartoon. Squidward let out a content sigh. This really was the best life he could be living. Chapter 4: Work/Life Balance. The nightly routine was quickly becoming the norm. Each day, the couple would return home from work, then the 3 of them would make dinner, followed by dessert in front of the TV. It was exactly what both partners had wanted for the longest time, and now, after all the tragedy that had occurred, they were finally able to live the life they wanted to live. However, the nightly routine was quickly getting, well, it wasn't boring, but it wasn't exactly exciting either. The pair had been so used to things going crazy that the normalcy just felt tame. Not that they were exactly complaining. Still, they wanted more. After Claire had gone to bed one night, the couple sat at the dining room table. Laid out before them, was stacks of books, and Spongebob was thumbing through each and every one of them. Squidward sat at his laptop, typing away with his tentacles and sighing every couple of minutes.
I just don't know, Squiddy.
Spongebob put a book down.
Me either.
Squidward replied.
I feel like we've looked through everything and we still can't figure out a vacation for us to take as a family.
Maybe we're not meant to go somewhere,
Spongebob questioned.
Plus, I really don't want to get on an airplane.
Oh my Neptune.
Squidward was in shock.
You were looking at places that required an airplane ride? I was looking at places we could drive to. That's what I thought you were doing too?
No,
Spongebob began remembering the accident.
I just wanted to show our daughter a good time, and there's not many places like that near Bikini Bottom.
Honey,
Squidward placed his tentacle on his partner's hand.
I don't expect you to get on an airplane. Not now, not ever if you don't want to.
Thank you, Squiddy.
Spongebob sniffled slightly.
So where should we go then?
How about a staycation?
Squidward grimaced at the word. He hated how stupid it sounded.
Hey, yeah!
Spongebob perked up.
That's a great idea! We could spend a whole week doing stuff as a family. We could go jellyfishing, to Glove World, maybe to a movie, and all the other stuff we love to do.
Then it's settled.
Squidward smiled.
That's what we'll do. But we need to get someone up to speed to manage the restaurant while we are away. I don't want to be on the shell phone every 5 minutes.
How about Squid NATO?
Spongebob suggested.
He's been great and really knows his stuff. Plus, he ran his own business for a while.
I like the sound of that,
Squidward said.
Maybe tomorrow we can go out after work with him and work out the details. I really don't want to have a business meeting over Krabby Patties.
Sounds great.
Spongebob remembered they hadn't really been out in ages.
I'll ask my mom if Claire can spend the night.
Chapter 5. The Promotion. You wanted to see me, Señor Tentacles? Squid NATO asked as he opened the office door.
Come in, Squid NATO,
Squidward said cheerfully.
And please, you can call me Squidward.
Thank you, Squidward, Squid NATO replied as he took a seat. So what can I do for you?
I have an opportunity for you.
Squidward leaned forward.
Spongebob and I are looking to take some time off, so we were wondering if you'd like to be promoted to assistant manager. And before you say anything, yes, it comes with more pay.
It would be an honor, Squid NATO smiled. And that was even before you suggested more pay, but I certainly won't turn down a bigger paycheck.
Great!
Squidward leaned back, relieved that the conversation had gone so easy.
Would you like to join Spongebob and I tonight for dinner at Fancy? We could celebrate and hammer out any of the details. We will also need to discuss hiring another cook as well.
I'd love to, Squid NATO said. What is this fancy though?
It's something other than fried food.
Squidward laughed.
Even though Spongebob would probably rather it was. Still, it's good and pretty much where all the business dinners happen in Bikini Bottom.
May I go home and change first? Squid NATO said.
Of course.
Squidward hadn't thought about that, but it seemed like a good idea.
Would you like us to pick you up, or do you want to meet us there? I don't think I'd seen you come to work in a boat.
No, I don't have a boat, Squid NATO chuckled. It's too expensive, but I will meet you there if you don't mind. I live only a few blocks from there.
All right then.
Squid NATO picked up his shell phone and reserved a time.
8 o'clock then?
Perfecto! Squid NATO stood up and shook Squidward's tentacle, then made his way back to the kitchen. Chapter 6. The Pleasure Side of Business.
Right this way!
A hostess said and directed the 3 diners to a table in a quiet corner of the restaurant. They all took a seat and started poring over the menus. Spongebob really didn't see anything that he'd liked, but figured he'd come up with something. All this food was, well, too fancy for him, and he wasn't even sure what half of the ingredients were. He was tempted to order off the kids' menu, but knew that would probably be embarrassing. So he sucked it up and tried to find the least intimidating thing available. While Spongebob studied the menu, Squidward and Squid NATO were in deep conversation. As it turns out, Squid NATO was a well-versed Spanish guitar player, and him and Squidward found common ground in music. Spongebob sat there quietly listening to the two of them talk and waited for the waiter to come and take their order. He'd found spaghetti with barnacle balls buried within the menu and figured that that was at least something he was familiar with. The two octopuses, though, ordered extravagantly and were rambling off things that the sponge had never heard before. Squidward also ordered a bottle of red wine for the table as well, which seemed rather unusual since Spongebob rarely saw his partner drink. When the wine came, Squidward poured out 3 glasses and passed them out. He then cleared his throat and held up the glass to make a toast.
To new beginnings,
Squidward said,
in both business and in friendship. Salud, Squid NATO.
The 3 clinked their glasses and took a sip. Both of the octopuses seemed to revel in the taste of the fine wine, but Spongebob hated it. It was much too bitter, and the alcohol burned his tongue and throat. Still, he didn't really want to make a scene, so he sucked it up and downed the glass, which quickly made him feel strange.
Another sponge?
Squidward held up the bottle and offered it to his partner.
No, thank you!
Spongebob replied, already feeling lightheaded. He then let out a nervous giggle for the lack of anything better to do and went back to listening to the 2 cephalopods go on about whatever it was they were going on about. Sometime later, the food arrived. Much to Sponge's dismay, the spaghetti wasn't like how he was used to. It was, well, fancy, and fancy food just didn't do it for him. Still, he picked at the food and did his best to eat around the things that were off-putting to him. Squidward and Squid NATO very much enjoyed their food though, along with glass after glass of wine. By the time they were nearing the end of the meal, Squidward had ordered a 3rd bottle of wine for the table and hadn't even noticed it was just the 2 of them slurping down the alcohol.
Dessert?
The waiter came back to the table. Spongebob instantly perked up, since this was the part of the meal he'd been waiting for.
Yes, please!
Spongebob smiled, still feeling a bit woozy.
Do you have ice cream?
I'm afraid not, sir, the waiter replied. Tonight we have a sea berry tart, a selection of bonbons, or a strawberry sorbet.
Oh.
Spongebob was disappointed.
Well, in that case, I'll just have a cup of tea.
Splendid, the waiter replied. And for you two gentlemen?
The bonbons for me,
Squidward said. And I'll have the tart, Squid NATO smiled. A few moments later, the waiter brought the desserts and a cup of tea for Spongebob. While the 2 octopuses indulged themselves in their sweet treats, Spongebob sat back and sipped his tea. He was starting to feel like a 3rd wheel here, and this night hadn't gone anything like he'd expected. Still, for the sake of the business and his partner, he continued to endure. After they'd finished, the waiter brought the bill, and it was the first time Spongebob hadn't seen Squidward choke at the price. Stealing a quick glance, he saw that the total was over $300, which made it the most expensive meal he'd been a part of in a long time, perhaps ever. But while still engaged in conversation, Squidward merely pulled out his credit card without so much as a wide-eyed expression. Would you gentlemen like to join me for a nightcap? Squid NATO said. My place is just down the road and I have an excellent bottle of vermouth I'd been dying to open.
That sounds lovely,
Squidward said, sounding fairly drunk.
Spongebob?
Sure thing, Squiddy.
Spongebob did his best to put on a smile.
That sounds great.
After the bill returned, Squidward scribbled his name on the bottom, and the 3 of them departed for Squid NATO's apartment. It was only a short walk, but that 1 glass of wine was still making Spongebob feel like he was walking on jelly. He hated the feeling and didn't understand how the octopuses were walking and talking like nothing was wrong. Once they arrived, the three piled into the elevator and went up to the 5th floor. They then made their way down a small hallway before arriving at apartment 502. "Welcome to Casa de Squid NATO," the Spaniard said as he opened the door. "Sorry, it's not much." What Squid NATO considered not that much was indeed quite a bit. The apartment was modern and tastefully decorated with a few pieces of art hanging on the walls. The furniture was all leather, and over a small fireplace hung a flat-screen TV. It was far nicer than either Spongebob or Squidward's home by a wide margin.
Your home is beautiful,
Spongebob said, looking around wide-eyed. "Gracias," Squid NATO said, relieved his guests liked his humble abode. Squid NATO then produced 3 glasses and poured out the vermouth. Spongebob really didn't want another glass of anything, especially since he had no idea what vermouth even was. Still, he accepted it and took a sip. Much to his surprise, it was actually very good, with an overbearing sweetness flanked by the taste of flowers.
delicious.
Spongebob said, not realizing it was alcohol. "Another then?" Squid NATO offered, and Spongebob nodded. Before long, Spongebob was beyond drunk. He felt like he was floating, and everything in the room was wobbling as he tried to focus on just what was going on. He also felt very handsy for some reason, and was trying hard not to just rip off his clothes and let Squidward have his way with him. To calm his needs, Spongebob climbed up on Squidward's lap while he and Squid NATO were chatting on the couch. He wasn't sure how the events unfolded exactly, but before he knew it, he was kissing Squidward and reaching over to pull Squid NATO into the fray. Rather unexpectedly, Squid NATO joined them and started letting his tentacles rub down the sponge's yellow flesh and slowly teasing his pores. This caused Spongebob to whimper softly as his desire for both of them continued to grow. "Shall we retire to the bedroom?" Squid NATO said suavely. "I think so," Squidward said and picked up Spongebob. He followed the other octopus into the bedroom, which was as beautiful as the rest of the apartment, and laid the sponge on the bed. He then turned his attention to Squid NATO, and the two of them kissed, letting their tongues dance in each other's mouths while their tentacles explored each other's bodies. Spongebob could only sort of tell what was going on, but he was horny and needed to be filled. While watching his partner and coworker lock lips, the sponge took off his clothes and laid back on the bed. With his eyes locked onto the scene in front of him, he began to explore himself, rubbing his more sensitive pores. "Our little friend looks like he's in need," Squid NATO chuckled. Both octopuses laid down on either side of Spongebob, who still had his hands buried in himself. Squidward removed his hands and rolled him over so that they were face to face. He then inserted his tentacles, weaving them in and out of Sponge's holes. Squid NATO followed suit, and eventually Spongebob had 8 tentacles rippling through his little body. It felt amazing for the sponge, like nothing he'd ever experienced before. He felt like he was on the verge of being ripped apart, but his two lovers were being so gentle that he knew that wouldn't happen. The alcohol was clouding things too, but he didn't care since all he wanted at this very moment was to feel more. The two octopuses started wiggling their tentacles in unison, and Spongebob moaned loudly at the new sensation.
Your arms!
The sponge cried out.
I need them!
What was that, little sponge? Squid NATO didn't really know what he was asking for.
"He wants our mating arms,"
Squidward chuckled. Well, let's give it to him then. Squid NATO shifted to reveal his throbbing mating arm. Squidward looked at the other mating arm with awe. It was beautiful and made his own look disappointing by comparison. He pushed that out of his mind though, and he reached over his tentacle and started to stroke it. So, where do we put it on a sponge? Squid NATO asked.
"Here."
Squidward pointed to the oscula.
"I know it looks small, but trust me, it's wonderful. Spongebob here feels amazing. Do you want to do the honors?"
I think we should dive in together, don't you? Squid NATO gave a devilish grin. Squidward was shocked. That thought hadn't occurred to him, but it was intriguing. He wasn't sure how Spongebob would react to having two mating arms thrust into him at once, but looking at his partner, he seemed too far gone in a drunken, pleasure-induced haze to really answer.
Lay down on your back.
Squidward instructed the other octopus. Squidward then picked up Spongebob and slid him down on Squid NATO's shaft, which caused Spongebob to growl at the new feeling. Squidward then got behind his partner and positioned his own mating arm at the sponge's already filled entrance and slowly started sliding his way in. Spongebob screamed as the pain shot through his body, and Squidward tried to pull out, but the suction cups under his own mating arm were stuck to Squid NATO's. The more he pulled, the most Spongebob screamed, causing Squidward to feel terrible that he was hurting his partner like this.
Neptune!
Tears flowed from Spongebob's eyes.
It hurts so good!
Squidward was confused. Did he just say it hurt good?
Are you okay?
Squidward asked his partner.
Yes!
Spongebob squealed.
More!
Not really understanding, Squidward pushed his own mating arm in deeper, feeling the suction cups finally give way and allow him to be fully inserted deep into his partner. It was such a weird experience, feeling the tightness of the spongy hole and the firmness of the other mating arm. It wasn't a bad feeling by any means, though, and after a couple of attempts, the three of them figured out a rhythm. Spongebob could hardly stay focused. He felt like he was going to pop at any second, and it felt like an Alaskan bullworm was slithering around inside of him. He loved it, though, and was quickly on the verge of erupting. His whole body tingled, and he was starting to unwillingly vibrate as the two octopuses thrust in and out of him in unison.
I!
Spongebob yelped. His eyes then rolled back, and he felt his entire body start to expand. He needed to come, but couldn't, since the two massive members inside of him were blocking his seed's escape route. "I'm close," Squid NATO moaned.
Me too!
Squidward chimed in and picked up the pace. A few moments later, both octopuses started to spasm. Squid NATO's ejaculation started first, and his seed started to flow into Spongebob's cavity. The extra lubrication from the cum was just what Squidward needed to get over the edge himself and quickly joined his new partner's spurts. A stream of expletives rained out from each of the octopus's mouths. Both of their mating arms were sensitive, and the feeling of them rubbing together while they still were coming was nothing like either of them had ever felt before. They couldn't stop either. And in what seemed like seconds, another wave was hitting them, causing them to deposit another joint load into Spongebob.
Fuck!
Squidward yelled as he tried to pull out, but was, once again, stuck.
No more!
Squid NATO tried as well, but was unsuccessful in his attempts. Both octopuses continued to pull, trying to dislodge their members, but it was no use. Meanwhile, Spongebob was having an out-of-body experience. He was completely quiet and motionless, save for his ever-expanding body. The feeling of the two arms continuing to work in and out of him, combining with the multiple cum shots, were too much for him to bear. As they continued to pry themselves loose, the octopuses orgasmed for a third time. By now, it was starting to get uncomfortable for the two of them, and they didn't think they'd be able to take much more of this. Squidward was growing increasingly frustrated too. He'd never had this problem before, not even back in his more wild college days. Finally, channeling all his aggression, Squidward managed to break the suction and with a loud pop, fell backwards out of the sponge. This opened the floodgates, and Spongebob burst into a cloud of cum that painted the walls, the bed, both octopuses, and anything else in the room. No, it just kept coming too, with no end in sight. Like a fire hose, cum streamed out of every one of the sponge's pores. When it finally subsided, Spongebob laid in a puddle of his own seed and looked very much deflated. "What on earth?" Squid NATO said, looking around the room.
Sponges come.
Squidward chuckled.
A lot.
You don't say. Squid NATO couldn't help but chuckle himself. It was good though, right?
Absolutely.
Squidward smiled.
And given the state of Spongebob, I'd say he'd enjoyed it as well. But we should let him rest, and I'll help you clean up.
Sounds good, Squid NATO replied. And this was certainly one way to celebrate promotion, now wasn't it? The end! Oh, I don't know what I was expecting with that one, but a lot of build-up and release. Alright, if you'd like to support the channel, like Sanders Edge here, you can, Sanders Edge is amazing. Keeps writing. You can go to patreon.com/regretfulreads, or you can become a YouTube member. You get an extra video a week, plus exclusive looks at thumbnails that were made and not used, questionnaires, Q&As, all that kind of fun stuff. So it does have its benefits. Plus, you get to support this. Anyway, join the Discord if you'd like, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.